streaming on live on YouTube now. So, and we do have quorum as well. Taking a look at the directors that we have on board.
Okay, thank you. We're just 1 o'clock now, so we'll get things started. We'll call the meeting to order. Welcome everybody. So what we're going to do today, we've condensed the board meeting a bit today, so it shouldn't be too long because we want to do a little strategic session afterwards, not for too long either. So we just condensed the board meeting a little bit so it's not too long an afternoon. So I'll just ask for a motion for the adoption of the agenda if I can, please. Director Dunn and Windover. Any questions on the agenda? Anyone opposed to adopting the agenda?
No.
We'll consider that passed. Thank you. Is there any declaration of pecuniary interest on today's agenda? Seeing none. Board of Director meeting minutes from May 27th. I need a motion to receive and adopt the minutes. Director Ross, thank you. We'll move. Second by Director Dunn. Any errors, omissions, anything about the minutes? Anyone opposed to receiving and adopting the minutes? Okay, we'll consider those passed. Thank you. We'll go business arising from the minutes. We have none. I know Jamie Coons, our board member from the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nations, doesn't look like he's on right now, but he got there's a letter that officially appointed by the chief, so he is an official board member. If he comes on board, we'll welcome him again. Item 6, deputations. We have none, no presentations. We'll move right into staff reports. 8.1, our first one is about permits issued. Pretty good numbers you're banging out there, Ron. I'm not sure where we can recommend improvement, but do you want to give us the Coles Notes version of your month? Go ahead.
Sure. It was there weren't as many permits maybe on the month overall, Mr. Chairman, and we were able to process some in the timeframes provided, and just more than anything, it's a full team effort. There is one person who does a lot of our permits and is really the linchpin there. It's not me. it's staff, but there are many staff involved in permitting. So we share we share whatever we get, whether it's the good or the blames.
Sounds good. Thanks. Any questions for Ron or anyone else on the permits? Director Hooper, go ahead.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. And I see it's in the CAO monthly report. Can you explain to me what streamlining is in your planning process, Mr. Ware?
Through the chair, the streamline permits are something we brought in. I'm going to say it was about 3 years ago now, and it was to deal with some of the particularly minor applications, decks, sheds, pools, fill of less than 20 cubic meters, those types of things. We wanted to just try and get them in and out right away.
So do those outnumber the really significant ones as far as, the streamlining ones, like the ones that are quick and easy sort of thing?
In this last month, they were more prominent than probably ever.
Yeah.
And they do tend to be in the spring.
Yeah. Okay, right. Good. Yeah. Thanks very much. Appreciate it. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Any further questions for Ron on the permits? Okay, we have a motion resolved that the following section 28 permits issued by staff being 221-087 revised, 221 to 144 revised, and 221 to 168 revised, 221-175 through 221-205 be received, and that the permitting performance report be received. Director Moore, will you move that? Director Moore, will you move that, receive the reports?
Yes, I will receive that.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll get a seconder, please. Director Hooper, thank you. Any final questions? Anyone opposed to receiving that report? We'll consider that passed. Thank you. 8.2 is the First Nations land acknowledgement. Mark, you're going to give us an overview on that report. Go ahead.
Yep, great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'll just note that Jamie Coons was able to join the meeting as well. So so pretty timely in terms of the agenda item. What I've done is just responding to the direction from the board of directors at the last meeting. Wanted to make sure this was part of the agenda package, let you know that I was working on it. So what we've done is we think that a couple of statements for land acknowledgement might be useful for a couple of different kind of events, and also making sure our staff are comfortable with actually giving the land acknowledgement statements. Part of that comes part and parcel with understand the history. So we're looking at working with First Nations and making sure that we train our staff on the First Nations culture and just give a little bit broader perspective to not only our staff, but also make it available to yourselves as directors. And then also looking at some opportunities as we move forward for integrating First Nations culture into the different work that we do. So that's just Cole's notes of that report.
Thanks, Mark. Any questions for Mark on that report?
No.
Councillor Dunn or Director Dunn, go ahead.
Oh, you're muted, Pat.
There we go. Okay. Yeah, just moving forward, I'm going to be looking for some sort of concrete action besides just an acknowledgement. I've made this comment at various other boards I sit on. An acknowledgement without an action for me is fluff, and I'm not a fluffy guy, so I will be looking for something as to what we're going to do about it. That's all.
Yep, absolutely. Through Mr. Chair, that is the intent, is be able to work with First Nations. I think the first steps are really understanding better the culture, and land acknowledgement is just a first step in that. But looking forward to different reports, for instance, that we write, making sure there's a land acknowledgement. I know that we're working on a Dalrymple management plan, and something that other authorities have done was work with First Nations to integrate that within their watershed reporting documents. So having an additional perspective. So totally agree that there's lots of things that can be done, and a couple of initiatives that I know that talking with Jamie Coons, he's pretty excited about as well, tying with some of our conservation areas. So totally agree.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments about the land acknowledgement process? Okay, can I get a motion then that the land acknowledgements correspondence be received, please? Director Ross, seconded by Director Windover. Any final comments, questions? Jamie, did you want to add something?
Actually, no, I got to take off here. I apologize. It's our election day today, so I'm a little bit busy. I have to go and pick up some members that don't have a license and drive them down to vote. So wish me luck. I voted for myself, so I know I got one vote. So, so it's always good. So, but no, I'll be next meeting though. But I apologize again. It's just a busy day today. So
No apology necessary. Good luck, and thanks for
okay.
thanks for letting us know.
Okay, thanks, guys. I'll give you an update. I'll shoot Mark an email and say if I'm still here or not. So
Sounds good.
Okay, have a good day, guys.
Yeah,
Thanks.
Thanks, Jamie.
Right.
So we have a motion to receive. Any questions? Is anyone opposed to receiving that correspondence?
No.
We'll consider that passed. Thank you. Item 8.3 is the Cio report. Mark, again, go ahead.
Yep, I'll just provide a little bit of a highlight for a couple of items in the Cio report. There's a lot of work that's going on in terms of our projects and just getting them up and running, and they're well underway. I did want to highlight our Kawartha Conservation Foundation. They've been very active. They've been actually meeting every week for the last several weeks, and what they're doing is they're preparing to launch an event. It's a Explore nature challenge event. And so this is something that Foundation is looking at maybe running every year, perhaps expanding out a little bit. And what it involves is hiking at this point in time, hiking every trail in Ken Reed. And then there's a medal that's given to the participants at the end. So there's a fee for participating in the challenge, and we think it'll be a pretty good success, and kind of ties in with getting people active and supporting our community in that way. So getting people out in nature and getting some exercise, spend time with family. So that's great. There's been a lot of work in communications and finance and the corporate services side of things. Our auditors are kind of wrestling with some of the practices that their auditing society has given out. So we're trying to get them in the office. We're looking forward to the pandemic kind of easing up a little bit, which I understand is underway. So that's great, and hopefully they'll be able to come into the office and do that year-end audit. In terms of planning, development, engineering, I think you heard a lot of the work that was going on from Ron there. So some tremendous work done by the team on that front, and on the enforcement side, it's pretty steady as well. So there's a lot of activity happening on the landscape, and our regs officer is working to seek compliance on a number of items. So. We are working with floodplain mapping as well, helping Halliburton with their floodplain project, and also working on the one remaining floodplain study and the City of Kawartha Lakes special project. And Stewardship and Conservation Lands are very busy as well with kind of getting projects up and running for the fall season. They just finished the big spring push, and now they're looking at implementing projects on the urban and agricultural fronts. And that planting usually happens in the fall, so very, very busy there. In Conservation Lands, they're extremely busy as well. Lots of activity going on, and some enforcement issues that we had to respond to. So timely that we had our provincial offenses officer training for those individuals, which certainly helps on the enforcement side. And then the IWM team has been again extremely busy with all the things that they're doing. They're embracing technology in particular in this field season. So we've kind of adapted a couple of the processes that would normally require a lot of field sheets to be generated, and those are now digital. So that saves a ton of time on the entry and speeds up the whole process. So that's great. One of them's on the administrative side of things. The other is direct input to actually streamlining our information as a whole. And then our citizen science projects are taking off as well. So we have a number of projects with some pretty tremendous success that we're seeing right now. For instance, on the nearshore project that was dealing with a water quality sampling adjacent to the shoreline. Fantastic response from our community volunteers sampling, and that was a gap in the lake management plans, just knowing how things are reacting on the nearshore. And there's a starry stonewort plant. It's a big algae plant that's kind of taking off in Lake Scugog. So we have 50 volunteers to actually throw a bit of a rake out from the end of the dock and do a survey of the plants that are coming in. And I know there's a lot of other work that's being done as well on bubblers and getting those projects up and running, as well as the senior citizen science projects. So with that, that's a brief summary of the Cio report. Mr. Chair, thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Sounds like you're gearing up for a full summer. Good stuff. Any questions for Mark on the CAO's report? Any comments, questions? Seeing none, we have a motion to receive. Just make sure I've got that right. CAO monthly report for meeting be received. Can I get a mover, Director Windover, seconded by Director Hooper? Any final questions or comments for Mark? Seeing none, anyone opposed to receiving that report? We'll consider that passed. Thank you. Correspondence 8.4. Mark, do you want to, anything you want to highlight in the correspondence? It's just to be received, but go ahead.
I think, Mr. Chair, you've highlighted the one piece of correspondence that I would probably highlight, which is the correspondence from Chief Kelly LaRocca from Scugog Island First Nations, appointing Jamie to the board. So that's probably the most significant one, the piece of correspondence that we received in the past month. The others are provided for your information.
Thank you. Can I get a motion that the attached correspondence be received, please? Moved by Director Ross, second by Director Dunn. Any questions on the correspondence? Anyone opposed to receiving the correspondence? We'll consider that passed. Thank you. Action item 9.1, Conservation Authorities Act, Regulatory Proposal Consultation. Again, I'll turn it over to you, Mark. Go ahead.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this is the comments that are pertaining to the active Environmental Registry of Ontario posting right now from the provincial government on Conservation Authority proposed regs. So these aren't the regs themselves. It's more the kind of thinking behind what the regs would entail, and a lot of detail, I would say, as well, that you would probably see in the regulations themselves. So these comments, what we're suggesting, or I'm suggesting, is that the analysis portion be submitted as the comments on the Environmental Registry of Ontario to the province. And in general, I think I mentioned this at the previous board meeting. The content of the consultation guide is generally quite encouraging, flexible and scalable in terms of implementation. And I think that the provincial government in engaging the working group has been very successful, and it's very good for the province and for anyone that's kind of involved in the regulation and the changes that are being proposed to make sure it's workable and practical. So I think that's been great. And I think from the earlier proposals that were identified, this consultation guide is much more applicable to what we're doing and a lot more workable. That being said, there are challenges. Certainly the timeframes that were identified in the regulatory proposal are very aggressive. And I think there's, in some cases, maybe not understanding the amount of work that needs to be done on creating a lot of the support mechanisms for the regulations on the operational side of things. So we are suggesting that a transition fund, it would be appropriate for the province to consider, as well as an ongoing fund to help support and demonstrate the province's commitment to develop natural hazards information. So kind of two different standpoints, but supporting all the things that the province is trying to accomplish. On the natural hazard side, moving into segment A of that proposal, and my comments there, generally saying natural hazards, the activities are very useful. They get into the details a lot, I find, in terms of the wording. So sometimes general wording is a little bit better than specific. And I think the important thing is recognizing that communications, public awareness, and education on the natural hazard side is a pretty fundamental part of our business. So that's been recognized, and that's a good thing. And also setting minimum standards for the flood forecasting program is also a good thing. It's a provincial program that's run by all 36 CAs using the same metrics, and those should relate to each other. So those are good. Moving on to the mandatory programs and services related to conservation lands. The one aspect that they really kind of identify in the report is that the controlled lands, as the province identifies them, is pretty problematic to be using in the same context as the lands that we own. So I think the thought from the province is probably that controlled lands, and Fleetwood Creek would be an instance of this. For instance, we manage lands on behalf of that organization, the Ontario Heritage Trust, but we really don't have a lot of control over that land. We operate under an agreement with the land trust, but we fundamentally put requests forward for considerations, and those are denied a lot of times. So we're not really in control of that land, I think, as a province would see it. So we're suggesting that instead of it is a requirement to have a management plan, for instance, it should be a recommendation. and that the lands operate under agreement as a reasonable approach to what the province is trying to achieve. In terms of conservation easements, we do have a couple of conservation easements. They are legal instruments that last 100 years, and those are registered on title. There's usually a baseline report that identifies what the property can be used for and what it can't. That is really under the direct influence of the landowner, and they really have to maintain that. So it's a bit unreasonable, I find, that a management agreement would be required for that particular instrument. And so having a management plan should not be part of that regulation. I think the legal instrument should stand on its own without creating additional requirements. And the other complicating factor is if a management plan is created, then that requires that landowner to fund it, because if not, they're in contravention of the Income Tax Act. So because it's a tangible benefit to them. So in the end, controlled lands could be included in a strategy document or as a part of an inventory, but the management plan side of things, I think, is there should be a distinction between the two different approaches between controlled and owned. The other thing that we're suggesting in the mandatory activities is right now the kind of saw-off point that the province has identified is that owning the property, paying taxes on the property, and enforcing rules on the property, such as trespass to Property Act, are things that are mandatory, but letting people on the property is not. So we're suggesting that passive recreation, hiking trails, which is an important part of enforcement in its own right, would be beneficial to include. And if there's amenities on top of that, I know some CAs have museums, some have trailer parks or tenting facilities. Those are additional different options. We have the dog park, so that would be an additional sort of amenity that would capture what the province is trying to accomplish. So let people on the land, but if you have anything extra, then that's a consideration for levy and for agreement as a result. And then the other point is the disposition of lands, and this has been picked up by Conservation Ontario as well. What we're suggesting is that disposition of lands could be appropriate in certain limited circumstances, where, for instance, a land trust who's actually dedicated towards protecting land for the long term would be appropriate. So that's segment B. And let me know, Mr. Chair, if you want me to stop and pause for questions at all on any of these, or keep trucking through.
I think you keep trucking, Mark. I'll just ask if any of the board members sort of have a question as Mark's going through it. Just don't hesitate to raise your hand, and then we'll stop and go. But I think you're on a roll. Go ahead.
Okay, great. So section C, I would just agree with the province that the items that they have identified are important, and protecting source water and drinking water for our communities is an important role. On section F, you notice I skip a couple sections there. They don't deal with any of the activities that we actually have. So it's there's the kind of inspector side on septic systems and Lake Simcoe's component related to the Lake Simcoe Protection Act. So those are those missing segments in there. But F is related to mandatory programs and services. And this is an important component of the consultation guide. And what the province has done is recognize the importance of managing the landscape on a watershed basis. So that was not in the previous regulatory proposals. And so having it in this proposal is significant. And I think what the province has done is try to find a balance between the natural hazards and conservation property side and other activities. So they're providing a flexibility for municipalities to make sure it's a rounded plan that includes all the things that should be included in a strategy. They're just making the difference between what is mandatory and would be billed by levy to other things that the municipality would have some decision on whether or not that's included in the strategy. I think that's a little bit complicated in terms of the logistics of how that would happen, but I think it's good that there is flexibility in that approach. So we provide the two options for the province there. One is that municipalities, as they've laid it out, has the ability to fund it according to how the province is laid out currently, or if the province wants to consider a more holistic expression, I call it, of the natural hazards. Land stewardship is one of the key items that we see as important for a land hazard management profile. You're putting trees on the landscape, you're helping attenuation of flows, and that's always a good thing when it comes to natural hazards. So the province has kind of recognized the stick approach and not necessarily the carrot. So that's a consideration that we're putting forward for the province if the board agrees. There's a section that's identified as Conservation Authority costs not related to delivery of services and programs. That really is corporate services and making sure that the functions of a business can continue. What isn't clear is how it's going to be treated. So that's important for minimum levy. And one thing that we've identified is, depending on how you separate out, the business function is always going to remain, but it does extend out to other things like, for instance, the special projects that we have on behalf of municipalities. So there's an outstanding question of whether or not that is split out. The role will still exist regardless of any programming, but it'll be interesting to see how it's treated, because it definitely does cross into special projects or other activities that the board might consider important. So, for instance, health and safety is always going to be required, and you still need to maintain your skill set and complement for doing that. You have to have a competent supervisor for all the programs, regardless of whether you have special projects or not, or other programs that are not mandatory. So the second big section of the consultation guide was the non-mandatory Conservation Authority programs and services. And this is the transition plans and ability to enter into agreements with municipalities. And what we've looked at is we understand the requirement there, but we really highlight the time frame, which is extremely tight, and the need for having appropriate and reasonable timelines, while making sure the regulations themselves are reasonable at the same time. So just suggesting more or less that the province should kind of take a look and make sure that whatever time frames they're identifying are reasonable, not only in relation to when they were able to complete the regs, but also in terms of some of the next steps that are required. And I'll skip to part 2 on page 6 of 8 of that staff report, or page 32 of the agenda, to the advisory boards, community advisory boards. And the advisory boards, and this was a pretty hot topic of conversation in the consultation, kind of leading up or coming up after the release of the consultation guide, is there's a lot of concern about how they might operate and potential duplication of roles, particularly, I think, given that the province says that the governance bylaws will be applicable to the community advisory board. So in the comments that we're proposing to be endorsed by this board are that the bylaws, components of them may be appropriate, but maybe not necessarily all pieces of the bylaw. So it should be geared towards the role and function of that committee, and that is the most important thing. You kind of tailor your terms of reference to whatever it is that you're trying to work with or manage. So, and that isn't the case as it is right now. The other aspect is this would be an increased cost directly to municipalities, no matter which way you slice it. So we've provided a couple of options for the province to consider. One is that since it is going to be an additional cost, that perhaps the province would like to financially support that as part of their levy, maybe increase it, which I think will probably go over like a lead balloon. So there's another option in there, which is consideration of including that in the minimum levy. So that was not identified initially, but would be a requirement by the province to establish. The other thing that we've noted, which kind of ties in with my report from the last board meeting, was that the list of considerations that are identified by the province are pretty extensive, and really the ability of the board to have influence over the group is pretty minimal. So we've suggested that consideration of a less prescriptive approach would be beneficial, and I know that comment has been picked up by Conservation Ontario as well. The last item in the consultation guide is the other regulatory matters. So right now there are 36 different regulations pertaining to all 36 CAs for the properties that they own. So it's great. I think it makes sense to consolidate those, but we should probably take a look at modernizing them at the same time. Every single regulation is pretty much the same from my scan of them, but there's some things missing. And so, for instance, the enforcement provisions are currently fairly limited. We don't have the same ability to manage our properties as the municipalities do for their lands, or the province for their parks. So looking at trying to provide an ability to update some of the fines that are in there. For instance, we look at some of our fines, and we prefer to use a municipal bylaw because the fine is less, because it seems a lot more appropriate for parking, for instance, compared to what our charge is. So looking at some modernization at the same time for those regs. And that I summarized basically all the information in the next page or two. But that's probably a reasonable summary, I would say, at this point, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Mark. I will add that our Conservation Authority meeting on Monday, most of these comments are pretty much in line with what was discussed there with the other conservation authorities. Isn't the timeline really tight for this, Mark? Doesn't it have to be in on the 27th of June or something?
Yeah, so the timelines are tight. So the province calls for the so the timelines on getting these comments in is for the 27th. That's Monday. So that's not a problem to turn around. I can get that in, no problem. But the timelines overall for the program, yeah, they're pretty tight too. When you consider that the regulation probably will come out for consultation as well, the province has to consider the comments that are provided on the ERO. So if you estimate a month for that, we're talking about July, the end of July, post for another 30 days probably for the regulation, and we're into August, and then we're kind of finessing the fine-tuned details at that point. So we have about a quarter of a year to do the transition plan.
Okay. Any questions for Mark on that report? Questions, comments? Everybody good with the submission? So then we have a motion, resolve that the comments provided in the analysis section of this staff report be endorsed and submitted to the province of Ontario through the Environmental Registry of Ontario as Kawartha Conservation's comments regarding the Ministry of the Environment, Conservation and Parks, regulatory proposal consultation guide, regulations defining core mandate and improving governance, oversight, and accountability of conservation authorities. Can I get a mover and a seconder for that, please? Move my Director Windover, second by Director Ross. Thank you. Any questions or comments? Final questions, comments? Anyone opposed to that motion? Okay, we'll consider that passed. Thanks, Mark. Do we also forward a copy of those to Conservation Ontario? Because I know they were keeping track of who was getting their submissions in and such.
Yep. Yeah, we'll definitely CC Conservation Ontario on that, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Okay, that's passed. Item 10 is new business. We don't have any new business. I don't see any new business. Reports and updates from board members. Any board member have anything they want to update us on? Okay. We don't have a closed session. And item 13 is a motion to adjourn. Just before we adjourn, we're going to do our strategic session. So after we adjourn, you can use the same link, same Zoom link that you have. Just stay on this session, but we'll adjourn. We'll take a couple of minutes after adjournment, 5 minutes, and then change it around. We'll get Brenda on board, and then we'll go through a fairly quick strategic session as well. So I need a mover and a seconder to adjourn the meeting, board meeting, please. Director Dunn, seconded by Director Ross. Thank you. Anyone opposed to adjourning? Not usually.